Welcome back, Battletech enthusiasts. I now have the very first results from my round-robin experiments, fighting every mech against every other mech. Actually, I have every mech and vehicle against every other mech and vehicle. Fighting a few rounds only, but enough. A pattern has shown up, and I already can declare the winners, at least within certain weight classes. If you see a little asterisk just before the RR, that means that's the local winner. So here, for example, it's the flea and the mongoose, which are kind of unfair because those have some Star League-ish tech in them or other unfair advantages. So those have the highest win rate. Now I include a win rate, a lose rate, and a tie rate. And all three of those are important because only if your mech is actually destroyed do you lose. If your mech runs away because it runs out of LRMs and then runs away, then you get a tie. And certain mechs like the Valkyrie and the LCT-1M, even though they have a very low win rate, have a very high tie rate, and that's because they will run away once their LRMs are depleted. At least that's how I've programmed them. So it's not so much that they are bad, it's just that they don't win, but they don't lose either. So you might want to keep that in consideration. It's like they are very hard to kill because they can run away. Also, I'm not really correcting for battle value, so I'm not taking the win rate and dividing it by battle value or anything. So literally, a awesome or an atlas is plotted against the same win rate as a locust. A locust that wins at 0.14 means it won 14% of all its battles, including against other light mechs, against vehicles, against demolishers, against atlases, etc. An atlas or an awesome might win 80% of its battles, but that's because it's counting everything. Both the locust and the awesome had to fight every other mech. So at some point the awesome was fighting a hunchback and easily blew it away. But the locust fighting a hunchback doesn't do so well. But I don't account for that. I just say here's the win rate. And so if you want to pick the best mech from a certain weight class, you have to look at the other mechs near it and see if your win rate is higher than the other ones near it. Oh, and how you read these is, if it says like const WLF1 equals const PNT 9R plus 1, you're looking at the Wolfhound. It just means it's the next mech after the Panther. So it's the const whatever it is equals, that's the mech that we're talking about. Then when it says RR versus all, it wins, and then in brackets some number, that's the number. So for the fractional wins in the round robin against every other possible mech and vehicle. I fought 3 times for each possible mech and vehicle, and there's I think there's like 150 different mechs and vehicles that I went through, including various variants. So you can kind of see the effect of variants too. Like you can see that the PNT 9R beats the PNT 8C, even though the PNT 8C has an extra ton of armor, and I assumed initially before I saw the result, I thought the 8C was better. Here we're looking at slightly heavier mechs, including the now the best ones here are like the Hoplite. That one kind of stands out and has its asterisk. It's a very heavily armored mech. The Riflemen and the Catapults, even though they're very good DPS and very good mechs, they don't have much for armor, so when they have to fight against some brawler and the brawler runs right up to it, they don't do so well. So that's why, even though they're awesome or they're very good mechs, their win percentages are not as good as you would expect, just because they are, after all, DPS support and not standalone brawlers. And my round robin was everyone is on their own, everyone stands alone. So a DPS mech is going up against a scout or a brawler or whatever it is that it's going up against, and fair or unfair, that's just how it was done. Now we're going into the assault class, and what you'll notice is that a few kind of stand out. The Awesome stands out, but in particular, the AWS 8V stands out even further than the others. It won a whopping 84% of its battles, but also it only lost a very small percentage of its battles. The other versions of the Awesomes also did very well, winning like 80% plus of their battles. But the most impressive mech of all was actually the LGB-7Q. The longbow, not the LGB-0W version, but the 7Q version, almost never lost any battle. It even did better than the Atlas. I was quite surprised, and it's cheaper than the Atlas. It's one of the more costly ones, but definitely cheaper than the Atlas. Nevertheless, it appeared to outperform. So it's possible that the longbow is the ultimate of all mechs and vehicles, in spite of its high battle value. Then I also did all the vehicles, of course, and the J. Edgar stood out, which is kind of surprising. I've always been very conventional. I went for the Savannah Masters, the Warriors, the like the cooling trucks, the Karnovs. I even have some strikers and things like that, and some goblins. But those were just not as good. Some of these vehicles are a surprise. The J. Edgar stood out as doing surprisingly well. Now, even though it only wins 27% of its battles, it did not lose very often. I guess it was able to get away or something because it's, well, a hover vehicle. Also, these light vehicles are not that great either. They generally tend to lose, but among all the ones that are of a comparable class, it stood out. Then going to heavier vehicles, perhaps not that much of a surprise, but the Manticore really stood out as an exceptional vehicle. More so than what I assumed. Like, I assumed that the LRM carriers and the demolishers and things like that would be, and maybe even the Bulldog would be like the ultimate tanks, just because that's what everyone does. But the Manticore stood out. It's a very high probability of winning, and thus it wins the mid-level vehicle competition and even outperforms some of the rather heavy vehicles like a Rhino. And finally, the king of the very heavy vehicles was the Shrek PPC carrier, and it was not the Demolisher like I assumed it would be. And it was, another one that's really nice is the Ontos LRM. But I just assumed the Demolisher would be the king of the hill here, but it wasn't. The Shrek took the top spot amongst the very heavy vehicle class. So this is the current status of my computerized simulations and the results from my initial round-robin tournament. Later on, I will do deep dives on individual variants of mechs and how they did, as well as individual weapons and what fraction of all damage, etc., was done by those weapons. But again, I have to actually think of a way to display the information, even if it's already been computed. So if you want more theory and games regarding what may be, as far as I know, the only actual full mech combat simulations with millions of battles, subscribe and you will see more wild adventurous results later.